it was good and bad all at the same
Right.
time.
Yeah.
But I got very emotional there. And of course, at the time that Martin Luther King went, you were not supposed to go to communist countries. He violated State Department guidelines, and
Oh, he did?
I think he had to go to somewhere like Czechoslovakia and then come a
From
train
another
over
country.
to
Yeah.
and
Interesting.
yeah, it is. And then he gave very much a message of peace,
Yeah.
and it's still remembered today. But it was not. It did not have the blessing of the United States government or the USSR.
Well, he was beyond blessing. He didn't need their blessings. He was beyond all that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I am looking good, and I am rolling.
Okay.
So we may begin.
So we're happy to have with us the Reverend Heartmut Fege. And he has many stories to tell about years here at Pawleys Island and other places. He started St. Peter's, and of course now Lutherans and Episcopalians we cooperate
Corporate
together.
fellowship,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he attends our church easily. I thought we'd start at the beginning. Tell us about Germany.
About Germany, oh,
Yeah.
okay. I came to this country in 1952 at the age of 10, so you know my age now. And and interesting, it was we came as refugees, which is kind of strange because coming from Germany, but we were displaced from East Prussia. East Prussia at one time, it was for close to 500 years, was part of Germany actually, you know, in the easternmost block, you know, bordering the Russia and the Latvian, Baltic country. Anyway, we came there because Germany. I always say this somewhat facetiously and somewhat thankfully as well, that I said, Dad, when you lose a war, that's what happens. You lose your home too. So, but anyway, but we ended up in West Germany. So we were refugees from East Prussia and then ended up in West Germany. And then we were sponsored by the Lutheran World Federation to come to the United States. That's how I came to America. And to a little place called Wartrace, Tennessee, or near Normandy, Tennessee.
How do you spell Wartrace?
W-A-R-T-A-C-E. Even to this day, when I spell things, I have to like pretend I'm writing W-A-R-T-C, Wartrace, Tennessee, to a farm that was owned by a General Schaffner, who we had to have a sponsor to come to America, meaning someone to offer you a job, and that's a whole book in itself. And we then ended up in Tullahoma, Tennessee, with a large German congregation. Tullahoma at that time was known, well, for a lot of things, but most of all because a lot of scientists came to Tullahoma, because Huntsville is only it's a short distance. So the wind tunnel in Tullahoma tested the nose cones of the rockets. I met Dr. Werner von Braun in Huntsville, Alabama. That's where a lot of the rockets were being developed and so forth. Just so happened when I went to the Lutheran church in Huntsville, he happened to come pay his dues, as he called them. He didn't go to church, but he paid his dues, you know, his annual offering. And the pastor introduced me. He said, here's another German. And so we met briefly, and he was on his way. So that's my story about coming to Tullahoma, Tennessee, in America. As I said, the congregation in Tullahoma was started by Richard Smith. Interesting, Richard Smith, my pastor, was also Father Will's professor at
Sewanee,
up on the mountain. What's the name of that?
University of the South, that's Sewanee.
Yeah, Sewanee.
Yeah.
So Pastor Will and I have the same pastor for a while. Pastor Will had him as a professor. I had him as my pastor. Just a connection here. And Pastor Smith just Here people say passed away. I say died. He died last year. For a while I was a hospice chaplain here in Georgetown. We started a hospice and we used the word died. But anyway, that's my connection with Father Will and coming to this country. Enough about my here in America.
Well, you have another connection, fire department.
Oh, yeah. When I came here to start the Lutheran Church, my last church prior to that was see, I'm getting where I'm having these blank spaces here. Anyway, I'm trying to remember this. In Somerville, St. Luke, Somerville, South Carolina. And there was no Lutheran church here, and the Lutheran church, they had, the story goes, there was a demographer at the head office of the Lutheran church, and they had the map of the United States, and he would stand and look at the map, turn around, and throw a dart. Wherever the dart landed, that's where they would start the church. Just so happens it landed somewhere in South Carolina, and they wanted one here, so I came here. And when I came here, as I said, there was no Lutheran church, and the fire department called Midway just started, and they met where there's a service station right here on the corner, not on the corner. Now there's a Shell station or whatever. That's where they met. And at the end of my tenure there, they actually gave me a jacket and a pin, and it was all volunteer in those days. And so the church was started here in '84. The ground, there was nothing but trees there. That's all there was. And Foster McKissick, I went to him. I said, "Would you help us with this?" And he says, "I'm not going to give you money, but I'll clear the land and sell the trees for you, and whatever's on there, you guys can have." So we got the land, and so that's how that church got started, if you will. And I mean, where do we go from here?
Tell about how you met at the Litchfield Inn.
Oh, yeah. Before we had the building constructed, we met at the Litchfield Inn downstairs, and it was called Big Daddy's Bar. It was a bar. And, you know, it smelled like alcohol and smoke on Sunday mornings, but nobody was there, you know. So right behind where I was standing, right behind me was a big glass window. And I had a problem because as I was preaching, I noticed all the guys kept looking past me, and all these young ladies were strutting with their two pieces past the window. So I moved the pulpit from the window to the wall. And then eventually we went upstairs. They had another room up there that wasn't quite as bad as where we were, and it was called a spirit room. And problem is, when I went door to door visiting people, they would ask, "Where do you meet?" And I'd say the Litchfield Inn, and they'd say, "Well, what room?" And I said, "Well, I sort of stumbled over Big Daddy's bottom, you know." And they said, "What?" And so we were glad to move upstairs, and from there we moved eventually to the.
Tell us why it was called Spirit Room.
Oh, the radio was going. Yeah, the first time the room was used was a group of Jesuit priests met there, or Jesuits. I'm not sure they were all ordained, but they met there upstairs. And then we moved to the elementary school, Wakama Elementary, and met there on Sundays. And then we moved to, when the building was finished in '89. Well, the reason I remember it so well, that was the year Hugo came. That's when the building was finished in the spring. We had, being Midway Fire Department chaplain, we were able to get the fire department with a fire truck to move down on a Sunday morning on Pentecost that year, '89, down Highway 17, and we followed in all of our cars, and we had our first service there on Pentecost Sunday at the new building. And so that's where they are to this day. And it's grown. Luckily, everything went according to our hopes and prayers.
Tell the story you were telling me about building the building.
Oh, well, you know, it's probably not a good idea if you build a building to get a member of the church to be the contractor, because then you had a little pushback. So Larry Young was the builder at the time, and his wife was the organist at the church, Suzanne Young, and. The building itself, I remember he was not well. He had some heart problems, and he had one of the few early heart transplants at the University of South Carolina, and he was related to the president of USC, who was a governor at one time. You may remember who that.
Fritz Hollings.
Who?
Fritz Hollings.
No, not Fritz. The governor of South Carolina. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, I think. Okay. But the point being I'm making is I went down, to be with him prior to surgery, and I remember going into the operating room, but where the doctors were getting ready. I remember a prayer at the time. I said, this is real early in the morning. Having driven here from like 4 o'clock in the morning, I went in and I said something to the effect, dear Lord, you don't sleep, but we do, and we're tired. Just make sure that, you know, the surgeon's hands and those who are going to be with Larry stay awake and that he'll do okay. And he lived for many years after that. He had one of the first heart transplants. He was our builder. But he didn't come all the time, and then there was rain, as it does here, in buckets. And I remember the roof was just partially finished, and the floor was finished in the church, in the sanctuary. And I said, Larry, we got to get that water out. He said, I can't do it. So I went in, and I got a big drill and drilled holes in the floor. He really got, I won't say what he said. He wasn't real happy. So all the water did drain out. I could just see the floor buckling up here. So that's the kind of the short. And then the bell, of course, the bell was donated by Genevieve Peterkin, Sister Peterkin, as she was so well known. There are no tuned bells at that time in America. The bell came from France, tuned to the Middle Sea, and we had a hole, through the bell to the roof, and we had kids. The bell was over 400 pounds. And we always had to get someone to get it started for a smaller kid. And if the kid held on to it, he'd just go back up. He'd go up about 2 feet and he'd come back down. And then, anyway, I could go on forever with the bell. It was donated, I should say, in memory of Peter Genevieve's son. His name is Preston. And I said, Genevieve, we need to put some plaque somewhere. And she said, no, I don't want it. So she did finally agree to put his name on the outside of the bell. She said something that's 40 feet up. Nobody's going to see it anyway. A very humble person, but many people do know her here. Mm-hmm. So that's a little story, a little background on the bell of the church, in memory of Preston Peterkin. So from there, where do we go?
Well,
my uncle. We can go back to Germany with the Bible.
Yeah. Show the Bible.
Yeah. This right here is this was when the first time I had enough money to travel to go to Germany. I was already ordained. We never went back because we grew up very, very poor here. That was the downside of some things here in this country. The General Austin Schaffner, people would look him up. He had. The old Schaffner had 3 sons, actually. All 3 ended up, in the service. But anyway, so I went back to Germany. I graduated in '69 from seminary, so it would have been in about 71, 72. And my uncle and I, who was a Lutheran pastor, he gave me the German Bible, and he wrote a note in it, basically. Mein lieben Neffen zu unserem Bruder in Christus, Pastor Heartmut Feges, Erinnerung an unseren gemeinsamen Dienst mit diesem Buch in Bernshausen in 1971. And what that simply means, he was in honor of our service together in this congregation in 1971 in Bernshausen. I thought, until I just read this, well, he lived in Schlitz, and I always assumed that's where the church was, but apparently the church was not right. It was only about 2 or 3 miles from the East German border. He took me to the border. And Stacheldraht means barbed wire, and then you had maybe 100 yards, and then another barbed wire, and little pillboxes every within sight of each other. And he asked me, why do you think they have these pillboxes? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, it's the most heavily mined border in the world, right? The longest at the time, and heavily mined. And if you get past the mines, somebody in the pillbox is going to take you out. Period. So, and he said to me, I always remember this. He said, which way do you think the people are going? Do they think they want to get in there or out of there? I said, probably out of there. And that was communist Russia back then. Mm-hmm. So that's my German Bible. As I told Dr. Roper, my only regret is that it's the Geneva, because it's not Luther. Mm-hmm. And we have men in our group, another pastor who's a Calvin. He's a Calvin fan.
We have a Bible study group that meets Thursday mornings, and we have a Calvinist.
Right.
And Hart holds down the Lutheran side of things.
We banter back and forth. Yeah. But I'm just thinking, you know, I was here when Tony Campbell came, and
Tell
he
us
and I
about
were
that.
both in a Rotary together,
Mhm.
and Chuck Murphy, and
Tell us about Tony and Chuck.
yeah, they're just, you know, we had a great deal of camaraderie. I mean, you know, pulpit exchange. I've actually had a healing service here one time, and I preached several other times here when some of the pastors were on vacation. I would be invited to do that.
This was in the building down here.
No,
This
this
building?
was here, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did meet Miss Ruby,
Oh,
so I do go back a few years.
right.
And I remember taking my confirmands to Miss Ruby's school, and just to show them, you know, that we have a black teacher with in a parochial setting here at Paulus Island. And some of the more well-known people in the black community here all went to Miss Ruby's school, you know. I'm trying to remember the name of the judge down here. He's no longer with us, and I had to go before him one time for a speeding ticket, but and he was good to me. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be worth.
The Bishop of Long Island went to this school here
Oh yeah,
and
Wow.
studied with Ms. Ruby, and then
she was the
Yeah.
most gentle, kind. I gave you a book where she is mentioned of black people of notoriety in the United States, and you know, she's in that as well.
the book is called I Dream a World.
Yeah.
And this is the
Right.
the poem
Yeah.
that Bill did for us.
And then I can maybe briefly tell you about the nativity. When I started the Lutheran Church here, when we finally had our building, every December we would do a live nativity scene with people, and and you know, people would dress in period costume, and we had children and angels. And only one year, we had his name was Festus, a donkey. That made it a little more authentic. And the only reason he had him 1 year, we tied him to the prop of the manger scene, and as a 18-wheeler came by, he clutched it and doubled it, and he let off a fire. You know how they make those big bangs, backfire? Well, the donkey took off with this manger scene. Everything was gone. So after that, we had no more animals there, and.
Being on the Ocean Highway has its disadvantages.
You what?
Being on the Ocean Highway has its disadvantages.
It does have some disadvantages, right on 17, you know. So that's, you know, we did that. There was a little bit of a push to have, like some churches do, you know, cutouts out of plywood. I said, if it can't be real, we don't need it here, you know. And we did it only maybe 3 or 4 nights, not forever, so not all season. And as far as I know, I mean, they still have it. They still have it. So, what else can I tell you about here?
Tell us about how you came to go to seminary.
Oh,
Because it wasn't a typical path.
yeah, that goes back to almost to Father Will, in the sense that it's a hard story to tell, in a way, because Vietnam, if you were not going to graduate school or seminary, this is your time as well, I would think. I
I
graduated.
went in the Army.
You were in the Army. I was not for the war in Vietnam at all. You know, the domino theory, I could never believe in that, zero. And many of my friends went to Canada at the time. I went to college at Middle Tennessee. Then it was college, and before I graduated, it became university, and majored in biology. And Pastor Richard Smith, who I said before was also Will's Greek teacher professor at Sewanee, talked to me about thinking about seminary. And my wife, when I tell the story, says, don't tell the story, but I'm sure you can edit what you need to. But I said I had a choice of either going to Vietnam, that I didn't really believe was right, or going to seminary, and came from 1A to 4F. So I was reclassified to 4F, not because I was afraid of being killed. I'm sure that was in my mind as well, to be honest, but I just didn't think it's the right thing. Something else that got me into trouble in some ways, if I can tell the story, is when I graduated, there was only one state at the time, New York, where a woman could get a legal abortion. And I belonged to a group called Tennessee Clergy for Consultation for Problem Pregnancies. That was a big organization then. And we counseled women if they felt there was no other way. We advised them and talked to them about Florence Crittenham and other places they could go to if they wanted to. And if they still wanted the abortion, then we had a network where we would take the woman to the airport in Nashville, and then somebody would meet them at the airport in New York, and they would have a pregnancy. Yeah. So anyway, that was more of the controversial.
This is before the Roe decision.
Yes.
So
yes.
And
I'm not sure why Nashville was one of the only places at the time you could get an abortion legally. Maybe, I don't know that, Actually, I got a call a couple of years ago here from public PBS, asked me if I would do an interview with them about that time, but they didn't follow up on it, so that didn't happen. Also, the first time, I was telling you, when I went to visit my uncle in Germany, busing became a big issue in Nashville. And all of a sudden, you had all these Christian schools who were having these, kids come, and it was to avoid busing, basically, integration. And I remember when I went to Germany, I said, here's the deal. When I come back and you have started a Christian school in this church, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to come back to this church anymore.
Because they were really segregation academies.
Correct.
They
exactly.
Weren't really...
Yeah. That's what it was. The pretense of other things. So that's some of my that's controversial part of my life. Yeah. So.
Well, it's interesting because to me, there is no contradiction in Christian belief in a woman getting an abortion, especially some cases are pretty extreme. A 50-year-old woman who's already raised 8 children who gets pregnant purely by accident with her husband, why should she be compelled to have a baby that's probably not going to live?
Yeah.
Why should a 10-year-old raped by her father? Yeah. And these are real things that happen.
Believe it or not, those were some that I did counseling with. I always remember this 13-year-old girl coming in, and an older woman who had 5 children already. And in some cases, they decided, not to get the abortion. I would say the large majority went on through with that. Tennessee Clergy Consultation for Problem. Yeah, getting back to the Vietnam thing, I do remember they had the convoy. What was it? They had a big march in Washington, and I drove all night with a good pastor friend of mine who was pastor of First Lutheran Church in Nashville to get to Washington to participate in the clergy march. It was not clergy; it was a march against the war in Vietnam back then. So those were interesting, tumultuous, not too different than what things are today in some ways.
Well, our laws on abortion are back where they were.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do that here in South Carolina now.
50 years later, here we are where we started. Right. But those Nashville years were good years. Now, just within the shadows, back then when I was in Nashville, the Ryman Auditorium is where they had the Grand Opry. And went a few times. And it was so bad when we were sitting down. If somebody spilled their Coke at the upstairs, water and Coke would drip down. Now the new building is right within a couple of miles of the McGavick Pike, where the church was finally built, where I was a pastor. Yeah. So those are my Nashville years.
How did you come to go to Vanderbilt?
Here's where I can brag a little bit. They called me one day. I got a phone call from Vanderbilt, and they said, "Would you like to come here?" I said, "I'd love to, but I can't afford it." And they said, "Well, we have some money if you want to come." So I got a grant, and that's how I went. And at that time, what's interesting about Vanderbilt is they had the first female dean of a divinity school in America, Sally McFay Tissell. And what I found interesting about my being there is that when the professors would, when we'd have lunch together, lunchtime, you'd have a Jesuit scholar, you'd have a Jewish rabbi, you'd have a Lutheran PhD with a history degree. They would all sit and talk, and nobody was upset with anybody else. They would all agree on everything, pretty much. I mean, their doctrine was certainly different, their theology, but Sally Tassell then came to my church for a while. And one of her graduate students was, she was one of my professors for a while. She wrote, she was an expert in New Testament and parables. And she brought one of her students with her, and the student was interested in becoming a Lutheran pastor. And back then, Lutheran pastors were not women. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, if they ever do, let me know. And actually, it did change about that time, because I do recall what happened finally was the fact that in the Lutheran church, you have to spend a year on internship in some church, you know, like, and then the seminary, the Lutheran seminary, who assigned internships, told her where she was going to spend her internship. And she said, no, I'm not going to where you tell me, I'm going to do it here in Nashville. And they said, no, we'll tell you. And she said, forget it. Into that story. Not that that's interesting, but I don't know what happened to her. The Sally Tassell since has left this world, but she was a great professor, a good teacher. Thank you about that question, why I went to Vanderbilt. I got a doctorate in New Testament, not a PhD. In some places I'm reading through, they gave me a PhD, and people that didn't know, okay.
It's a DD, right?
No, it was an Doctorate of Divinity, absolutely, yeah.
And you wrote about the parables.
I wrote about the parables. Yeah, when you graduate from seminary in the Lutheran Church, you get an MDiv, Master of Divinity, and then if you do specialized work, you know, like I did, I had a thesis about how people could learn in a pastor's class. A much better way to learn would be, rather than didactically teaching about the parables, have them act out parables. And I used a very complicated instrument of that to measure people's growth spiritually, or certainly emotionally in some ways. And when I went before I graduated, you had to meet with an examining committee. I'm not good with math. The statistical work was done by a good friend of mine who had a PhD in statistics. And I acknowledged her work on that. Well, the examining committee got into a real controversy. They said, well, you had to do that yourself. We're not going to give you your degree. And then one of the professors says, will you excuse us a minute? So they sent me outside. An hour later, they let me back. They said, you're going to get the degree. Mm-hmm. You're going to get the degree. Matter of fact, the lady who helped me with that lives in Charleston now. But anyway, that's another story. So that's how I got it. I actually had to spend a whole semester at Vanderbilt. They wouldn't let me do it in absentee those days, you know. And I had to, on Sunday mornings, St. Luke's Lutheran Church, they had to get a supply. Once a month, that congregation flew me from Nashville to Charleston, paid the airfare round trip so I could preach once a month and give communion. And then as a graduation, they gave me a set of Kittle's Greek words to the New Testament.
And you use it still today?
When I finally did retire, I gave it to a pastor who I respected, and she had a church in, well, she's retired too now. You know, in these interviews, you can live people long enough, you can stay here. Yeah, she still lives in Charleston, but she was a member of St. Peter's Lutheran Church. So she commuted to the seminary in Columbia, Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary on East Main Street. Yeah. Half of the Lutheran pastors, by the way, are married to Methodist girls.
Seems appropriate.
Because Lutheran Seminary is a couple of blocks from Columbia College, which is a Methodist school. Yeah.
My sister went there.
Did she?
She did.
Wow.
Yeah. And
yeah, I took some day class. Interesting, when I started seminary, I hadn't graduated from MTSU yet, because I was, I wasn't too interested in going to classes, and so they let me start on the condition that I would finish up my degree while I was at the Lutheran Seminary if I go into Columbia College. and I took some day courses there in ceramics. Oh yeah, good school.
Good. Yeah, it was the Columbia Female Academy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mostly trains teachers nowadays.
Right.
The first time that I spoke to some group that was not in Chapel Hill,
Right.
my sister had me come and do a class on Reconstruction is very controversial.
Yeah.
And so what are the UNC professors saying about Reconstruction, a time when black people could vote and hold office?
Right.
And,
Right.
so I indoctrinated them with the Chapel Hill liberal idea
Right.
of Reconstruction.
Yeah,
I did that
yeah,
at Columbia
yeah.
College.
Yeah, that reminds me of something similar. Well, in some way, when I was in Somerville, St. Luke's, we started a preschool kindergarten, and we had some black children started coming, and one of the parishioners invited me to. She needed to talk to me. Went to her house, and she told me, she called them grands. My grands will never go to that school. I don't believe in that, you know. And her name was Miss Canarans. I said, you know, Miss Canarans, here's my answer to that. If I'd been born here in Somerville, or even in South Carolina, had lived here all my life like you have, I would probably feel exactly like you do. But I haven't been born here, and I haven't lived here all my life, and you're wrong. Simple as that. I'm going to miss your grandchildren, but, you know, still. Well, a week later, her daughter came and visited me. She said, don't worry about Mom. My children will go to the kindergarten at St. Luke's Lutheran Church.
Good.
Sometimes you do have to push a little bit, stand your ground if what you believe in.
Integration does not just happen.
No.
You have to do something.
Yeah.
Marcia and I were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Integration, gentrification, anything that happens is not really just happening.
I do have to add one footnote to that story, which is well, I was there. We decided to build a new building, and the old building on Central Avenue, and that's where we were going to put the new one. And the same lady says, "There's no way you're going to be building that. What are you going to do with the old building?" I said, "We don't need. We're not. The church is not it's not a preservation society. We don't need to save old buildings. Now, if you're in another like Germany, where those buildings were built 600 years ago, and they were built to last, not like this little building that we have here." And she says, "You know what? I'm going to sit on those front steps when the bulldozers come." And I said, "I'm going to drive one." But the end of the story is they decided to leave the church, get it on the historic register, because it was a church that a lot of people came to in the summertime when the mosquitoes were bad in Charleston. And the new church, they had enough land to build a whole new building, probably within the same block. So she got her wish finally, especially about the church.
You didn't drive the bulldozer.
I didn't drive the bulldozer. Pauline Canaris, God rest her soul. Yeah.
Tell me about some other congregation members that you've interested in, stories about congregations.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Let's see. You know, a congregation is just sort of a microcosm of where we happen to be at any given time. I'm just trying to think of, nothing just pops right out at the moment in terms of members.
Well, you are in the political spectrum. You're pretty liberal, and your congregation around here would not be.
Well, again, I would say St. Peter's Lutheran Church here. I wouldn't change anything. We had the first. Thank you for asking. I just happen to remember a gay couple came to us, and actually, someone said there's where the pizza place is down here on Highway 17. What's it called now? Anyway, there two guys ran a ceramic shop there. Okay, and one of them was out front with customers. The other one was in charge of the making of the ceramics, whatever they did there. And this is common knowledge. Jess and Roy, known as Jess and Roy. And I'm thinking to myself, am I going to invite them to church? Everyone knew Jess and Roy and their sexual orientation. And I said, yeah, I'm going to. I went and visited them. They came to church. I ended up baptizing one of them finally. He had never been baptized. became very active in the church. In that new building, as I was telling earlier, the new building had no pyramids, no chairs, nothing. Jess and Roy made the first pyramids for us. Being in ceramics, they made all the communion ware for us. And when they finally decided to move, they moved. Both of them began to have health issues. They moved to Charleston. They wanted to be closer to a hospital. Mm-hmm. The congregation gave them the biggest going away party you ever saw. Mm-hmm. So here we are in a relatively conservative community.
It is conservative, yeah.
I would say.
But your church was not, yeah.
And the congregation was not at all. They gave the part. As a matter of fact, the building, the church we have beautiful stained glass rose window, and they had a replica of that window made to give them as a going away present. Oh. And no one ever came to me. The only time somebody did leave the church, in the Lutheran church, where you put the American flag is important. Mm-hmm. You don't put it in the chancel, because the church belongs to the Christian community all over the world. There is no American Lutheran church or whatever. And the lady wanted to give the American flag and put it up in the sanctuary. And I said, it's not going to work. Can we put it in the fellowship hall? No, she had to have it in the sanctuary. I said, it's not going to happen. And they got upset and left. That's the only time I can think of a specific major issue where people left that particular congregation. Mm-hmm. And they went to another church locally.
Well, you were lucky, because they leave for lots of reasons. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You baptized the gay fellow, but he could not be married there, right?
No. They never asked to be married or anything like that. Now the Lutheran Church has gay priests,
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I can't give you the details, who. If I could think. Anyway, it was just a play that was. I still have the book that we used for the play. Bill was Bonhoeffer, and I had a small part in it. I had a hard time remembering my lines, because I had to go out into the congregation for part of the lines. So I had this swastika on my sleeve, and I still have nightmares, because in the middle of my dialogue, or monologue, actually, what it was, I couldn't remember all the lines, so I just made up a few, and I said them in German. So it really gave it a little authenticity,
I would think so.
Yeah, it was a good. We had a full house here, that's for sure.
Bill, we've interviewed Bill for this series.
You what?
We've interviewed Bill for this same series.
Okay, great. Yeah,
we lost a great priest.
He and Mark are great guys. Yeah.
We lost a great priest by not letting him go. Right. But we certainly have gained a great servant of the church.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was Mrs. Reed, Manny Reed's wife?
I think Manny was involved in that somehow. Maybe she was the director at the time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised, though. Yeah.
Manny Reed was an Episcopal priest.
Yeah.
In the area. His wife was heavily involved with the Swamp Fox Players in Georgetown. Right. And was no-nonsense director. There was some other people, I think Hank
Stroop
was in there.
Yeah.
And he describes her as being quite a taskmaster.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'm thinking of Alan Houghton. He and I were good friends, a member here, obviously. And I remember one time, Alan, two things. One time he invited me to have lunch with him. And I said, we had our food. I said, which one of us is going to say grace? And he said, neither one of us. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't pray in public. He said, one of the few things Jesus said not to do is stand on street corners and in public places and have long prayers. Uh-huh. So I said, okay, I'll leave it at that. Another time he invited, and he also had a group that met once a month of clergy, or mostly clergy. I think they were all clergy at his house. Mm-hmm. And he was always very gracious and provided, and we talked about confidential things. He did that for many, many years. It's called Under the Seal. We called it Under the Seal. And one time he called, he says, would you like to go over to down McClellanville to, there's some island offshore. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, I said, what?
Bull Island.
Bull Island. Mm-hmm. Bull Island. You had to take a ferry there, right? So we went with him, and as we got there, it started raining a little bit. And he said, "I don't want to." Well, he got off. We all got off, and then he said to the person leading he says, "I'm going to go back." And they said, "You can't. The boat will come pick you up, and we'll come." He said,
4 hours later.
Yeah. Alan, with his choice expletive, said, I don't want to wait till later. And so we stayed, obviously, and then, there was no facilities there, so I went back in the woods someplace, and suddenly I got a call. My wife was calling me, "Come, Heartmut, come, hurry, hurry." Well, Alan was lying on the ground. He had sat on a bucket, fell over, he couldn't get up. And I know later he had Parkinson's, and that was sort of the beginning of that. It was pretty sad, but he was a true champion of the church in so many ways. He and Billy. So that's my story about Alan, Alan Houghton, and he was, like I say, he was a good friend. Any other parishioners? I think that's all that come to mind right now.
Okay. Remember when we still meet to talk about the Bible.
Say that again?
We meet to talk about the Bible over here. And there was a fellow from Philadelphia, John.
Somebody came to our men's group?
Yeah, he came all the time. He was one of the people that started it. And I can't think of his last name, but he was, he wanted to be a Catholic priest.
Right.
And then decided not to and got married and all that.
Right.
But he was one of the founders. And when you would take a Lutheran perspective and Watkins would take a Calvinist perspective,
Yeah.
he would give us the Jesuit perspective, which was different.
Yeah.
Was Egan with the other
No, the
story?
other one, well, I was in Somerville. I always cut myself, I was a runner. I ran a marathon. Not even I did run a marathon, but not the one. A friend and I, he was a pawnbroker right on the corner of Central Avenue, George McCullough's, and he and I would run together, month after month, and we both qualified for the Boston Marathon.
Oh.
George did and I did by running then it was called the Isle of Palms Marathon. We had enough time that we both qualified. Unfortunately, the marathon was right before Easter, during Holy Week. Well, there's no pastor going to go to a Boston Marathon during Holy Week. So I never got to run that one. But he did. And he put up a huge banner in front of his store. The point of the story is that he and I would run together and practice, month after month. He was about as conservative as anybody I've ever known in South Carolina. And I was pretty much on the opposite end. Yeah. And any time that we wanted to go a little faster, we went into a real controversial conversation. He didn't want to hear what I had to say, and I didn't want to hear what he had to say. Either one of us would take off and go faster, right? But that was a good story. As a matter of fact, the Channel 4 the news people in Charleston did a piece on that. They brought a pickup truck, had a cameraman on the back of the pickup truck, and they had us run behind the truck. And I had told him the story about how we were practicing, and somebody said, "Okay, tell George something you don't want to hear." And I said, "George," and the truck moved faster. Oh yeah, I don't know what happened. George gave me a copy of that tape. It was taped in, videotape, so I don't know what happened to it, But that was another good story.
That's marvelous. That's marvelous. Well.
But churches and other churches, my last full congregation, full time, was in Cape May, New Jersey. And what happened is Cape May is a little tiny seacoast town, and the church had no parking place left to park. People couldn't find a park, so they sold the building to a Remax real estate office, and I went to New Jersey. My wife's parents were not doing well health-wise, so we decided to go to New Jersey to be with them. Well, I was there. I couldn't sit still long enough. I talked with the bishop, and he said, "Oh, we have a little church down in Cape May. Do you want to take a look at it?" And I said, "Sure." And I ended up with Cape May, since they sold the building, they actually met at the VFW. And so my first sermon, not practice, but you had to preach, see if they liked you. I preached, and right behind me, where we can go into the bar, they had a big thing, bar closed on Sunday. So, so when I finished with the interview and all, I went around and the guy at the bar said, "Well, it's not 12 o'clock yet, but I had my collar on. He said, if you like a drink, I'll give you." It doesn't say I can't give it away. And so anyway, I did go there for about 4 years. A new building was built on the mainland, and it's doing okay right now. But I thought the interesting story about that little congregation down in Cape May, Messiah Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church at the time was into renaming churches like Community Lutheran Church and all of that. And the congregation said, "We've been Messiah for 200 years, and Messiah, we're going to stay." And I said, "Good for you." End of story. Yeah.
Well, Messiah has a theological significance that community doesn't really have.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So.
Well, you've been.
And as I said, now that this one is out, I can only hear with my left ear, and that's not enough to take it all in.
You've been an important part of this congregation and part of this community, and we sure appreciate that.
Yeah.